Okay, so I thought about covering my recent Ryzen 7950X overclocking results in a bit different way. So earlier this month, so during the first weekend of August, I actually attended the biggest LAN event here in Finland, and nowadays it's actually a computer expo as well, the Assembly Summer of 2023. I attended the event together with Jokot. The event has been hosted since like 1992 or so, and nowadays it has been hosted like twice a year for a very long time. So there's both a winter event and also a summer event, but the summer one is much larger one. So we actually overclocked the latest AMD and Intel based platforms during 2 days during the event. So the event lasted from Thursday until Sunday, but Sunday is mostly just people start packing their stuff quite early on during Sunday, so it's no point to bench during Sunday. So we attended the event during Friday and Saturday. We did the overclocking on the Jimm's PC Store's booth. So Jimm's PC Store is one of the largest, especially enthusiast-oriented like PC hardware stores here in Finland. I was approached by a few of the top guys from the store during my recent trip in Taiwan during late May and early June. We actually discussed about this event during one of the evening parties that were hosted throughout the week during Computex. And well, I said yes, and we started planning the actual overclocking demonstration, like what hardware we would like to run and so on. So during my trip in Asia, we had a short discussion about the possible hardware and so on. And as we couldn't get the latest overclocking oriented graphics card from ASUS, so the RTX 4090 Matrix, as it still wasn't available. I think it's coming out of the market within a few days. They at least said it would be available during August, so I think it should be available very, very soon, if not already. So 3D was kind of out of the question. We did have the 4090 Strix card during the event, but I don't think it's very easy to run on LN2. It's possible you need like the Elmore Labs EVC tool to raise all the voltages high. There might be some heavy like power limitations, so you might need to do some shunt modifications, maybe BIOS modifications and so on, and it's not very clear can you run the card high enough with the software that's provided for the Strix card. So I don't know, so it didn't seem that easy. So we decided to do just 2D overclocking, so the latest AMD and Intel based platforms. ASUS was the main sponsor for the motherboards, Corsair was for the memory, and Seasonic was the main sponsor of the power supply. Seasonic has always been very helpful with these kind of events here in Europe, so huge thanks to Seasonic and especially Niels for all the power supply units during these past few years for all the events that have been hosted here in Europe. So for the AMD, I decided to request the ASUS Crosshair X670E Gene, which seems to be the best motherboard for overclocking, at least from ASUS, for the latest AMD Ryzen 7000 series CPUs, because it's a relatively small form factor motherboard with only 2 memory slots. So it's single slot per channel design motherboard, and it should be very capable of running very high memories with 1:1 ratio with the memory controller and so on. CPUs for the AMD, we requested the 7950X and the 7900X because they are the top CPU SKUs from AMD for the 7000 series. Of course, the most interesting or the most common CPUs people usually like to buy nowadays are the 3D models from AMD, and on the Intel side usually some of the larger core count locked CPUs, because they are relatively cheap and you can choose a much cheaper motherboard for those CPUs. So like the 7800X 3D is a very popular CPU, and on the previous generation I think it was the 5800X 3D or something like that. But the latest 3D models from AMD on the 7000 series, they are actually locked, so you cannot overclock them at all. So there's not really point to run that kind of CPU on LN2 if it's completely locked and you cannot really overclock it at all. So we decided to go with the 7950X and the 7900X. We also had one pre-tested 7600 by Jokot, which was very good on cascade cooling. So we had 3 CPUs in total for the AMD system, and on the Intel side we decided to go with the ASUS Z7950X obviously. And CPU wise we had one 13900KS qualification sample provided by Jimm's PC store, one just very basic random 1300K retail CPU, and I also brought my best pre-tested 1300KS CPU, which can do over 7.5 GHz on the P cores. So on Friday I started straight away on the AMD system, so I decided to start with the 7950X, which is the most highest end option for the AMD 7000 series CPUs, and the CPU was actually pretty alright. I noticed quite quickly it can run close to full pot temperatures. Sometimes it could run full pot and sometimes it would freeze right at the end, so at around like minus 190 or at minus 191, but it was able to run like 6.7 GHz on a multi-threaded tests like Geekbench 3 and Citybench R20. This is the result I got during the event. 143,833 points. Overall score 12,516 points on the memory, but this was just DDR5-6800 with 1:2 ratio, CAS32. This was the first time I ever ran this platform, so I obviously didn't have time to really fine-tune the memory, see how high I could run the memory with 1:1 ratio and so on. So this was pretty fast, like fast and dirty run in Geekbench 3 and in Cinebench R20, etc. But I managed to do top 5 result in Geekbench 3 multi-core score during the event, which was pretty alright. And this was actually the rank 3 score, rank 6 score in Cinebench R20, also at 6.7 at 19,637. I also ran X2654K quite briefly, but I had some efficiency related issues, so that's not really worth mentioning at this moment during the video. So here's the actual system when I was running the 7950X. So Dimastec hard 2.5 bench table, the Crosshair X670EG motherboard with the T-Rex container, Cryonaut thermal paste, and here's the power supply we had from Seasonic. This was actually the Seasonic Prime PX1300. It's a very nice power supply unit, but if we had the 4090 Matrix card and we ran it on LN2, I would have probably requested the latest model, the Prime TX1600, because it has the newest PCI Express power connector already natively available from the unit. So with the PX1300 you still need to use the adapter for the latest PCI Express connector, the 16-pin one, I think it's 16-pin. And the memory was the Corsair Vengeance DDR5-8000, which I already covered on my channel. We used the best 2 sticks on the Intel platform and the worst 2 sticks on the AMD platform, and the best 2 were already mounted with the Bits Power custom heatsinks and the Bits Power LN2 container, and I ran the memories on LN2 on Saturday. So those were pretty much the results on the AMD side. After the 7950X, I briefly checked the 7900X during the evening of Friday, but it didn't really go well at all. I couldn't run the CPU any colder than like minus 85 or so. I wasn't fully sure, was I doing everything alright? Like, I was thinking, did I have moisture on the motherboard? Because there definitely was a lot of moisture on the motherboard. So Jokot actually reran the 7900X as the first thing on Saturday morning. The AMD CPUs, the latest one, so the 7000 series CPUs, they are a huge question mark when it comes to extreme overclocking. The cold bug can range anywhere between minus like 80 to minus 196. So it doesn't matter at all. Even if you have absolutely amazing CPU based on air and water results, if it cannot run cold at all, you cannot really challenge the top scores on LN2. So you have to test each CPU individually, see if they can run full pot temperatures or close to full pot temperatures, and then actually see where you can get from there. So the 7900X could only do like 6 GHz multi-core or 6050, so it's definitely not good enough at all, as the top scores are made at like 6.7 to 6.85. So that was pretty much it, and Jokot actually ran the 7600 after the 7900X on Saturday, but the CPU couldn't do any higher on LN2 compared to what it was doing on Cascade cooling. So it also locked very early on, maybe at like -90 or so. Here's the run we got during the event anyway. So top 5 score in the 6-core category in CPU Pi 1 billion. This is the only benchmark where this architecture is still leading. So I think on the every other test, the 13600K KF is much faster. So the GPU Pi is the only one where the AMD Ryzen 7000 series really shines. So top 5 score made by Jokot at 6.375, 1 minute 4.3 seconds. So that was pretty much it for the AMD side of things. The Intel CPUs we had at the event, they weren't really good at all. The 1300KS qualification sample, it stopped at like 7.1 to 7.2 when it was tested by Jokot on Friday when I was running the 7950X. Same story pretty much with the random retail 1300K. It also stopped at like relatively early on at like 7.2 or so. So the only good Intel CPU we had at the event was my pre-tested 1300KS. On Saturday when I was running the Intel system, I mainly focused on the memory because I already knew what the CPU could do on LN2. So I obviously tested the maximum frequency for the P cores just to demonstrate the maximum frequency for the audience, because we did have like at least a few hundred people come to look at our booth during those 2 days. I'm sure we had at least a few hundred, but there were a lot of visitors at the whole event overall. So I could run 7.5 in Cinebench R20 and in Geekbench 3, but I mostly focused on memory overclocking, because that's something people have never seen before. Quite many of the people who were visiting our booth, they had seen like CPU overclocking on LN2 on some YouTube videos or on previous live demonstrations, because there has been LN2 overclocking done before many times during these assembly LAN events in the past. Like I think the latest stuff was done in like 2012 and 2011 by SF3D and other guys. And in the past, at least like Samsa was doing LN2 overclocking. I'm sure he was doing it maybe 15 to 20 years ago. And there were also like Mackie, who's quite famous for his AMD overclocking stuff, as he's working at AMD. And I think also the Swedish overclocker called Kink has been doing some live demonstrations during this very same event in the past, like in 2006 or 2007, something like this. So I tried to run the best 2 Vengeance sticks on LN2, which I pre-tested on one of my previous videos, which could do like 8700 plus on air cooling. So I ran both the CPU and the memory on LN2, and I actually managed to do DDR5-9000 stable in Geekbench 3 with CAS32, 47, 42, 36 command rate 2, and the score was 17,664, which is definitely alright for this configuration. My highest score has been a bit over 18,000 at DDR5-9200 with the Hynix Green OEM sticks. So this is actually a pretty good result from Corsair. And the funny thing was about these sticks that they could actually run close to full plot temperatures. There was absolutely no cold bug or cold boot bug on these sticks. And that's very rare when it comes to DDR5. So I'm sure if we found some better sticks, they could run even higher, because I actually ran the memory sticks as low as -180. So that's extremely cold for memory, or for DDR5 memory I mean. So people actually like to see the memory being run on LN2, but of course like memory overclocking is probably the hardest topic when it comes to overclocking for the average Joe. It's very hard to understand because everything is kind of harder to read, because For example, the DRAM frequency in CPUs is the different value as the mega transfer per second value, so DDR5-9000, but it was pretty alright. So we definitely did the best what we could during the event, and this was actually where we stopped. So we packed our things and we left the whole place on Sunday morning. I took the AMD system with me back home, so the 7950X as well as the motherboard, and I ran the whole system again during last week, and I managed to improve my scores by quite a bit. So the CPU is definitely good, the 7950X I mean. I managed to do the rank 2 score in Geekbench 3, 146,032 points at 6.725-ish. So the CPU clock didn't really go that much higher compared to what I could do during the event, but the memory was completely different story. So as I already said, I had never tested the platform before the event, so I couldn't really max out the memory, but when I really had time at home, I managed to do DDR5 7200 with 1:1 ratio. So you can see DDR5 7200 with CAS 32, 42, 36, 36, and even TRC at 38, common rate 2. And the F clock could actually run pretty high on this CPU. I could run up to like 2133 with the same temperatures. When I went to 2200, the cold bug actually came up from -190 to -145 or so. But the memory score is very high, 13,552, and that was the reason why I got the overall score so high. Because you can see there are other guys behind me who have much higher CPU frequency, like Splave at 6.85, 145.7 thousand, OGS at 6.775, 145,000 or a bit over. So the memory score was definitely the key. It's affected both by the actual memory as well as the F clock. So the F clock seems to give much higher boost on the memory score compared to the memory itself actually. So like Splave over here, DDR5 6400, 32, 37, 37, 58, and very basic TRC 12,106 points. So that's actually the reason why I got the score so high. I think it's not like completely impossible to challenge the score made by SafeDisk, but it's extremely difficult. So I would need to get like a very lucky run and everything to really get a bit higher score than this. So that's something I could still try maybe, but I have some problems at the moment, which I will mention very soon on this video. Then the X265 4K was very interesting. So I managed to get the efficiency issues solved. So I got the score much higher. At the event my score was only at like 63 or 64 FPS. Now I got the FPS up to 68.5 ish. And look, I have the rank 2 score, which was very easy to get, at only 6.61. Top is Splave at 6.75, 68.71, and rank 3 is SafeDisk at 6.7. So I was very close on getting this score, but when I reran the thing, I started getting like moisture related issues because my session had been going for a very long time. I had to take all the things apart, try the system and so on. So I actually stopped after I got this score. So I cleared the CMOS, I turned on the system, everything was alright. I was in the BIOS, I turned off the system, I heated everything, I let the system dry for 2 days, and when I came back I still noticed there's some moisture remaining inside the CPU socket and around the socket. And when I dried everything, I tried to turn on the system, but then I noticed that things are not going like correctly. So I had weird debug codes all over the place. I took the thing apart once again and I looked inside the socket, and there was actually one bent pin. This pin over here that had been like, it was bent down. I wasn't sure was it touching any of the neighboring pins, but it was like completely bent down towards the PCB of the motherboard. I tried to lift it with tweezers, but I noticed immediately that it's completely loose. So the pin had actually cut from this point over here. And that's something that has never really happened to me, or I think it happened once on some 775 motherboard. So it actually had cut, and now the system doesn't turn on again, or it does turn on, but it after a few debug codes it gets stuck at debug code 12. So according to Jokot, this pin is actually needed. So now pretty much the motherboard is in dead condition. The CPU seems to be like alive and working, because it was alive and working when I shut everything. And I'm trying to find a new motherboard, so I cannot run the system anymore before I get a new motherboard. So that's actually pretty sad, but this is a very important message. It seems to me now that the AM5 socket is very fragile. If you have any AM5 motherboard and the 7000 series CPU, do not use too much mounting pressure on the CPU cooler, because this has been damaged by CPU cooler mounting pressure, and maybe the temperatures have caused a bit of stress as well. I always use springs with my LN2 containers for this reason, and I don't go like overly tight when I tighten the container towards the CPU. So now based on this result, I wouldn't even tighten the thumb nuts all the way in. Just a little bit so that the pot doesn't wiggle or move, but I wouldn't go like all the way in. Take this as an important message about this whole socket and platform. Kind of sad, but things can happen. But this hasn't happened to me that often before. So the newest AMD socket, because it's actually an LGA socket compared to the PGA socket, this seems to be very fragile to me. So I don't really like it. Like overall, the latest AMD 7000 series CPUs, they are kind of annoying. It takes tremendous amount of time to get the system up and running. Like it can take up to 2 minutes for the system to boot, even if you just press the reset button on the board, because it does the memory training and everything once again. And with my CPUs, I always had to warm the system back up to -35, even after a normal reset, to get the system boot back to the operating systems, and that's very annoying. If you crash at -190, you have to warm back up to -35 and then get back cold once you get into operating system successfully. That's very annoying. So that's pretty much my overall LN2 overclocking experience with the X670 platform. So all of the results are on hardware bot. For me are the 7950X results, and the 7900X results and the 7600 results are posted by Jokot. We didn't submit anything from the Intel platform because we didn't really get any like competitive score in any of the benchmarks, because we kept the CPU at lower frequencies, like over here, just 6.13 on the CPU. So huge thanks to Jimm's PC Store, ASUS, Corsair and Seasonic for making this event possible, especially Jake Crimmins from Corsair, because I actually requested those 4 special sticks directly from Corsair's Taiwan office. They were much better than the very basic retail kit we had from Jimm's PC Store, so it was much easier to get very high scores with those sticks compared to what we could do with the very basic stuff we managed to find ourselves. So hopefully you like to see this video and hear about this event. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Maybe check out my Patreon page as well if you want to support my work. And yeah, thanks for watching one of my videos once again, and I will see you on the next one.